Welcome to MyLife, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche, a good week. We continue the journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav HaShalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav HaShalom, Rabbi Yoel HaKohen Khan Olav HaShalom. It is also on the schus and merit of Rav Yezev Yecheskel and Risha Katz Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many healthy years. We are at the beginnings of chapter 3, Perek Gimel in Tanya, where after explaining the Chelik Elikam Mal Mamash, this Nefesh Elikiz, the divine soul that is within each person, within each Jew, he's now speaking about the anatomy, the structure of that soul. And so far we've established that that structure mirrors the structure of the Eser Sfiris. There are two categories. There is the imois, the three imois, Chochma, Bina, Das, the cognitive, and there is the Shiva Kfulas, which is the 7 emotions, and the same thing in the faculties in the soul. He explained that there's the Moichin and the Midas. The Moichin is Chochma, Bina, Das. So in the Nefesh Adam Shenechlekes L'Shtayim Seichel and Midas, the Seichel is Keil Chochma Bina V'Das, and the Midas is Avas Hashem Upachde V'Yirosei L'Farei Chulu. And Chabad is called the Imois, the mothers, the sources, so to speak, and the Mokel the Midas, and the Midas are the children, the offspring of this Chabad. So we're going to continue now from Ubira Inyan. Alter Rebbe is now going to explain in a powerful and fascinating way the process of how the mind, the intellect, the cognitive faculties give birth to emotions. And keep in mind, we're talking here about the divine soul, the Nefesh Elikis. We will talk about the animal soul, the Nefesh Abamis later. Right now we're talking about the faculties in the divine soul, so the focus is on divine experience. Firstly, the cognitive understanding the divine, understanding Elokus and Göttlichkeit, and then bring it into an emotional experience. So we have a full relationship with Eibishter. Not just one in the mind, but also with the emotions. But the process is from Moichin to Midas. To understand this, we need to dig deeper and understand how the mind works. And here we're going to have a real breakdown, the caliber of the Alter Rebbe's analysis of the human psyche, of how the mind works, and how in turn it awakens and arouses and stimulates emotions. So let's learn inside. Ubira Inyan. Here's the explanation of this Inyan that we just established of Meichin and Midas, the Meichin being the Mokir for Midas. The mind, Seichel, intelligence, is the source for the emotions. Kihine ha-Seichel sheba-nefesh ha-maskeles Shehu hamaskil kol dover. The rational soul's intellect, which is its power to understand all things. What is this level called? He says, Nikra, it's called by the name Chochma. Nikra b'shem Chochma. Koyach ma. Chochma is made up of 2 words, koyach ma. Power and what? Koyach is a power, and ma is what? We'll explain. Let's first begin with the opening line. What does he mean by hini haseichel shebenefesh hamaskeles shu hamaskel kol dover? So when you read it initially, why couldn't the Alter Rebbe just say hini haseichel nikra b'shem chochma? Intelligence is called chochma. Now we know intelligence is also going to be Bina and Das. So that's why the Alter Rebbe is coming to explain it's not just Seichel intelligence. It's the maskel kol dover. It's the seichel shebenefesh hamaskeles shu hamaskel kol dover. The one that understands all things. Or you can say conceives of all things. The word maskel. But what does he say about shenefesh hamaskeles? What is nefesh hamaskeles? So there are different ways you can explain it. And it seems like you can really cover it from one end of the spectrum to the other. On a basic level, you can say nefesh hamaskeles is another name for nefesh halikis. Since we're talking about the divine soul, this divine soul is also called nefesh hamaskeles. Why? Because the primary force that drives the divine soul is the seichel. We're going to learn later in chapter 9 that the mokem mishkan nefesh halikis hu b'meichen shebereish. Because the reflective mind is the driving force in the divine soul. In the animal soul, we shall learn that the impulsive emotions are the driving force. But in the mind, the nefesh halikis is the mind, because the mind is always reflective. It doesn't follow impulses and temptations. It's not an emotional, subjective creature. It's following a divine approach to things, and that is a reflective mind. And that's indeed why the mind of the divine soul, the seichel of the divine soul, gives birth to midas, because it directs the emotions instead of the other way around, where emotions can impact the mind, like he explains in chapter 9 about the animal soul. But here we're talking about the divine soul. So you could say nefesh hamaskeles is basically the nefesh halikis in the context of the seichel of the nefesh halikis. However, you can also touch nefesh hamaskeles that's connected to nefesh hamaskeles as in the seichel within the nefesh. In other words, the nefesh of a person is a soul that is not a composite of different faculties. It's a nefesh that includes the power to have seichel. And in that sense, you can associate it with what Chassidus calls the koyach hamaskel. Like he says, shu hamaskel called over, the power to conceive of every idea. There's a koyach hamaskel in the nefesh, just like there's a koyach hariyah, the power to see. The power. We're not talking about the actual sight. The power to see in the nefesh then in turn informs the koyach hariyah. When it manifests in the eye, you actually see something. So seichel would be when you're activating seichel. But there's a koyach in the nefesh called koyach hamaskeles or koyach hamaskil. However, from the hemshech of what he says in Tanya, where he's saying that this is the level called chokhmah, the nefesh hamaskil, the nefesh hamaskil, so the koyach hamaskil, in the context of koyach hamaskil, is not necessarily only chokhmah. The koyach hamaskil is the general power in the soul of all cognitive faculties. So it's most likely that when he says nefesh hamaskeles, he's talking already how the nefesh is associating with the process of a cognitive understanding of things, which begins with chokhmah. But in truth, you can definitely say that the Alter Rebbe is covering the whole process of how seichel begins in the nefesh, because he calls it clearly nefesh hamaskeles. And then he says it's maskel kol dover. So the nefesh, you could say, is a faculty, it's like a reservoir, or the engine room of intelligence. And that in turn generates the process of being maskel kol dover, conceiving of every idea. That is called chokhmah. So that's context, chokhmah now, we have an explanation. That chokhmah is the first the point of departure of how the conscious mind works. So we have a superconscious, in Chassidus it's called chokhmah stima or koyach hamaskil. That's not yet active. That's a power we're not conscious of. Then there's the power when we actually conceive of an idea. You're learning something. You have a problem, and then suddenly there's a flash. Sometimes it's called borek hamavrik, like the flash of lightning. A flash, a snap, a spark of an idea. That is nefesh hamaskel, shu hamaskel kol dover nikra b'shem chokhmah. That's what's called chokhmah. We're soon going to understand how chokhmah leads to the next level of bina. But first, let's discuss that first point. So every intelligence does not begin with a full breadth of understanding. Nobody learns something the first time, and you read one word or you read one sentence, and you understand the whole thing in every detail. Pasha not begashmi, it's not possible. You begin with a spark, with a kernel, a seed. That seed could remain just an idea and a concept that disappears and dissipates, or it can manifest and become a full-blown concept, an idea that's comprehended by Bina. We're going to soon learn that this is the father and this is the mother. The father provides the seed, and the seed develops into a fetus, into a full-blown child in the mother's womb. So the same thing with Chachma and Bina. He already called them Imes, but we're soon going to learn that this is Abba ve'Ima, like father and mother. So Chachma is the kernel, the spark. In a seed, everything is concentrated inside the seed. Even though you don't see it yet, and even the person who's conceiving of the idea doesn't see it, but it's still all there. So this is defined. So the seichel, seichel shebenefesh hamaskeles. So here we have the seichel in the nefesh hamaskeles, the intelligence that is contained in this nefesh hamaskeles, which, as I said, can be a name for the nefesh halikis. It can be the koyach hamaskel. It can be something in between. But clearly, seichel shebenefesh. He doesn't just say kihine ha-nefesh hamaskeles itself is called chachma. The seichel in the nefesh hamaskeles. So clearly, it's manifesting in a form of seichel. And this seichel, the nefesh hamaskeles, hu hamaskil kol davar. This is the one that conceives. Its power to conceive all things. So he says, what is this called? B'shem chachma. And immediately says, and what is chachma? Koyach ma. He's not adding another thing that shuhu koyach ma. It's koyach ma. What's koyach ma? Now the letters chachma, chof, ches chof, mem hey. So ches chof is the reverse of koyach, and ma is the second half. So it's a fusion of two words. And this is coming to explain why it's taka called chachma. So literally, the word koyach means power. The word ma means what? When you say mazeh, what is this? They use it by the man. Why was the man called? Because they were wondering, what is it? It evokes a sense of awe, of wonder, like a surprise. So let's discuss what that is. When a person has an idea that just flashes into your mind, let's say you're struggling with a problem, or you're learning something you can't really resolve, or in general you're just walking in the street or you're doing something, and suddenly an idea falls into your head. Where did that idea come from? It's almost like we say, where did that come from? What is that? Ma. Once the idea is being developed, you don't say what. Now you're developing it. So you say it's the power of what, you can say. Chassidus explains that this includes also the concept of nochnu mo, bittul. It's a sense of bittul because it's not something you're owning. You sense that something greater than you are has now just entered your consciousness. So it's called koyach ma. But koyach also has significance here. So it's explained in the different Maimorim that chokhmah consists of two elements. One is a sense of wonder. It's the mind, like almost the imagination, the wonder of the mind as it recognizes and a certain resonating truth. You don't understand it yet fully, but there's a wonder. There's almost like a sense of something greater than you are. But chokhmah is also a koyach. The koyach, it also manifests as one of the faculties. So it's koyach ma, the power of ma, and also as the first of the 10 faculties that will lead to the next level called bina. Which also explains another thing. Afterwards we're going to learn, right, in the next lines, that from this koyach ma, it's going to become from koyach el hapoel into bina. And there he doesn't use the word koyach habina. Because koyach can mean two things. It can mean a faculty, and that you could say koyach ha-chochma, koyach ha-bina, koyach ha-das, koyach ha-chesed, the faculty. But koyach has also another meaning, in this sense that it's a potential. Koyach and poil, a potential. This seed of chochma, besides being a faculty, also carries another thing. It contains tremendous potential, which bina will develop and expand upon and comprehend. So now we have an understanding of what Chochmah is, somewhat of a dissecting of the very nature of Chochmah. And what is that dissecting? So let's just go back. HaSeichel shebe nefesh hamaskela shehu hamaskel kol davar is called Chochmah, koyach ma. It has both elements. You could even say that the ma touches like the source of where Seichel comes from. In the language of Chassidus and the Maimorim that talk and explain this piece in Tanya, it's how Chochmah faces Keser. The Koyach HaMaskel, the Chochmah Stima, is in Keser. It's in a supraconscious state. Chochmah, though it's a conscious spark and flash, but it's facing and experiencing how Keser is communicating to it. So it doesn't see Keser, but it's facing it, and that's why there's a ma. It's like a bittel of Chochmah to that which is above it. The Koyach of ma, say Chochmah, Koyach and ma, the Koyach is already how it's becoming a faculty. It's still in a state of potential compared to Bina, but it's not complete potential because there is a kernel, there is a seed. An idea has entered consciousness. So you have here the whole full process, you can say, from the supraconscious into consciousness, and you have it in a kernel. It begins with a seed. And we see all of life is that way. Whether it's in the world of vegetation or in the world of animals or in the world of the human being, everything begins with a seed. The seed then develops into a sapling and into a full-bodied tree. Same thing in the world of animal kingdom, achai, min achai, and the same thing in min abedaber, in the human development. And the same thing is in how Seichel works. So it's not a surprise. This is the process how God created everything. Even Brias Ha'elam is this way. Rashi explains from Medrash, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz, everything was created in the Bereshis bara Elokim. But it was in a nuclear form, in a nucleus. In a type of nebulous state. And then each day drew out from that hiyuli, or in the words of the Ramban, in that so-called seed, it drew out, and that seed then, Yehi Oyer on day 1, Yehi Raki on day 2, etc. So this is how Seichel works. It starts with the Seichel Shem Nefesh HaMaskel, Shu HaMaskel Kol Dover, Nikra B'Shem Chochmah. The Seichel in the Nefesh HaMaskelas, that's Koyach Ma, which combines two elements. The Chochmah as it looks upward, and you can see how the Chochmah looks downward and associates with the next step, which we continue reading now. Now that we've established the first step of the cognitive process of intelligence emerging in the conscious mind, so now he continues, he says, when you bring the potential, which was in Chochmah, to fruition, koyach means potential. Here, it's not complete potential because you can say the koyach hamaskel is much more the potential. The nefesh hamaskela, so you can say the levels that are deeper inside the very source of seichel. Here it's a potential, because it's like a seed is a potential for the tree that's going to grow from it. So it's not completely potential as if you don't have anything. There's substance. It's a nekuda. In the shemus of Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yud is Chochmah, Hey is Bina. So there is a Yud, but it's a dot, it's a spark. So when you bring the potential of Chochmah to the fruition, actualization, would probably be the better word. To actualize it, and what does that mean? Shem is Bein and Besichle, Lahavin Dover Lashure, Ula how do you bring it into actualization? How do you actualize that potential? Through meditating in your mind. To clarify an idea in its full richness and depth. So the Alter Rebbe is not just saying contemplating, he brings it in detail. He says the details here. Shem is bein and besichle. Again, he's using the word seichel because seichel encompasses all chochmah bina, and later we'll talk about das. So he says when you contemplate and meditate in your mind, again, lahovin dover lashure, which means to understand, to clarify an idea in its full lashure, to its full richness and depth. Lashure could also mean properly, to its full potential, if you wish. Actually, to full depth. Metoich eze dvar chochmah. he continues, Hamuskel besichle, from within. What are you doing this? You're taking it from the raw, or the seed-like and kernel. From any dvar chochma, he's using the word chochma, because the chochma is still the nekuda. Hamuskel besichle. Going back to the words before, muskel besichle, hasechel shabenefesh hamaskel shu hamaskel kol dover. So now, what you're doing is you're taking that kernel, that spark, and you are developing it and actualizing it in the fullest sense of the word. Lashure la'amke. And where's it coming? Mitech eze dvar chochma muskel besichle eze dvar, because it could be any dvar chochma found in the mind. This is called nikra bina. So just like before he said, what is nikra chochma? He defined chochma as being that first step, koyach ma, that first step of seichel shebenefesh hamaskelas, shu hamaskel kol dover, that the step of conceiving of an idea. Now he's talking about the development of the idea. That is called bina. So bina is actualizing mekayach alapoyel, the koyach of chochma. Now it's very obvious, since the Alter Rebbe used the word koyach ma, you can say the koyach ma, the koyach of chochma, is now becoming not ma, is becoming something of substance. That koyach is coming into poil. In chochma, it's still koyach ma, because what dominates there is the wonder, is the what is this? Yes, it's become a spark of an idea, but still what dominates is the wonder of it, the resonating truth, if you wish. In Chassidus, it talks about a lot of levels in Chochmah. Chochmah has the union of Hanochas Sichlis, a resonating truth. It has the element of the Nekuda Pnimis, Nekuda Kavona Pnimis, the intention of the whole idea, what its real inner spirit is. And also Chochmah is also connected to Riyah, to seeing, the visualization and clarity that Chochmah has. But all that is not developed understanding, that's all a sense of something greater. I don't want to use the word intuition, because I've not seen that intuition is used in this context, but it's definitely a sense of a truth, of a higher truth. Later in Perek Lamed Hey, in the Haggadah and Tanya, Perek Lamed Hey, the Alter Rebbe is going to bring Memshei Meiri, the Magid, that Chochmah, that's where reigns the sense of Hu Levadei ve'ein zu loseh, God alone and nothing else. So you see right away that's a deeper truth. But in Bina, the koyach that is ma, in Chochmah now becomes not ma. It doesn't say the word, but it becomes a yesh. Sometimes in Chassidus it talks about Chochmah being ayin, which is like ma, the koyach of ayin, and Chochmah ma'ayin timotze. It comes from ayin, and it's in a sense a state of ayin, as it looks to so-called the superconscious keser. And Bina now, it's become a koyach el apoyel, because he's developing it in the proper way with all its entire richness and depth, in the fullest sense of development and actualization. This is called Bina. Now when you think about it, Alter Rebbe, he's not just using Chochmah and Bina and just saying, he could have said Chochmah and Bina like he said right till now. This is Chabad Chassidus. You're taking terms that we've heard many times, terms that come from Sifrei Kabbalah. It's also in Tanakh you find Chochmah Bina. And of course in Teresh Shabbat Peh. And he's explaining what it really means in the Keiches HaNefesh, which evolve, as we said, Nishtalshel Mehem, from the faculties or the attributes of the 10 Sfiras Elyenis, the higher spheres, divine spheres. So we're getting here is a real picture, depicting a picture, painting a picture of our faculties, starting with Chochmah and Bina. We understand now what Chochmah is, what Bina is. And all in the divine soul, the Nefesh Elikis. Now the Alter Rebbe continues. V'hein, these two levels that we just established, what's called Nikra Chochmah, Nikra Bina, we have Chochmah and Bina. He calls now and he says, V'hein, these cognitive processes of Chochmah and Bina, Heim Av, of V'eim HaMelidus Avos Hashem V'yirosei Uparde. These cognitive processes of Chochmah and Bina are the father, Heim, Hein, these are the father and mother, which give birth, hamelides, avas Hashem, to love of God, v'yirase upachte, and to the reverence, you could say trepidation or awe of God. So now we're moving and defining these two levels. First of all, we're calling them father and mother. Till now, there were all three levels. Chacham, Bin, and Das were called three mothers, because in general, they're the mothers that give birth to the emotions, as we discussed. But when you break it down further, Chacham and Bin is Av ve'em. That's the first point. And Av ve'em, they give birth. Just like in the physical world, you need two parents, a father and a mother, to give birth and conceive a child. Here, the case children would be the midas, beginning with Ava and Yira, Chesed and Gvura, which are an outgrowth, the offspring of an Av and Em. Now, why is it compared to an Av and Em? So again, in the Maimonim it explains, this Tanya. We learned in Perek Beis, if you remember, that the Av is the Tipus Moyach HaAv. The Av provides the seed. Then he continued, as the soul that's originated in the divine Chochmei law, as it branches off in different souls, it develops. And he gives the example, developing like the gestation of the fetus in the mother's womb. So the seed that fertilizes the egg develops now in the mother's womb. So Chochmah and Bina compared to that. The interesting thing is, there he was talking, the focus was on Chochmah, because he wanted to explain how all of the neshama comes from Chachmasi Yisbarach Moyach Ha'av Bonim Atem L'Hashem Elokeichem B'nei B'chei Yisrael, and that Moyach Hu v'Chachmasi Echad. And even as the souls branch off, they're also connected to that Chachmah, to the father's Moyach Ha'av. The child also is broken into parts. There's a Moyach the Rosh B'nei Yisrael, and the Kfayim, the souls that connect more to the, what do you call, the toenails, to the heel. But they all originate from that Chochmah. Now, because we're talking in Perek Gimel, we're talking about how the soul's faculties are manifesting. So now he's already breaking it to Av ve'em, because you need now the development of that kernel of the seed. There, the point was the neshama as it's connected to Chelek Elikam and Mal Mamish. Now we're talking about how the neshama's faculties are branching out. So now we have also, within each person, we have the Chochmah, which is the Av, and we have the mother, the Ima, which is Bina. And they will give birth, and they give birth to Hamelides, to Avos Hashem v'Yiraseh Pachte. So we'll stop here and continue next year. Everyone have a good tavach. You can access all these shiurim at tanyaapplied.com, and you could also pose any questions. Everyone be well. Kol tuv and aksiv v'chsim eteva.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.